Zhou Wei unexpectedly became the state of Zhou Wei. On the day of the collapse of Nanjing, Xiao Ya, who used to despair, drank a bullet and committed suicide, while Fan Xiaoyu died for Zhou Weiguo, will Zhou Wei, who became the state of Zhou Wei this time, let that scene happen again? No, he will never let that happen in his heart. He needs a bayonet and a gun in his hand to tell the inhumane Japanese army that although China is weak, not everyone can come and bully us. Even if you can come, I will make you pay a heavy price. Keywords of the novel. Anti-Japanese War. Starting from Zhou Weiguo's joining the army, no pop-ups, Anti-Japanese War. Starting from Zhou Weiguo's joining the army, download the complete text, Anti-Japanese War. Starting from Zhou Weiguo's joining the army, latest chapter reading. Chapter 1. Hardship. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Hardship. Grass. Zhou Wei glanced at the withered wild dog wandering by the edge of the field in the distance, then lowered his head to look at the package beside him that had already been opened and cursed for a long time. Because he traveled through the world of snow leopards and became the state of Zhou Wei. The reason why he was certain that he was Zhou Weiguo was in the dusty suitcase next to him. He found the student ID of Dongwu University and the certificate issued by Suzhou, as well as some silver coins and family member certificates. However, he is not sure when it is now, whether it is at Huda Mountain, the Battle of Songhu, or on his way to the military academy. But he was certain that this should have happened after Zhou Wan, this bastard, ruined his marriage, otherwise the name Zhou Weiguo would never have appeared on this student ID. Wrinkled, Zhou Wei took out a cigarette from his black student uniform. He put identification documents and other items into his backpack and stood up. He was unsure when it was, so he went to find someone to figure it out. Following this dirt-gray road that had never been overgrown with weeds, he walked west for nearly 2 or 3 miles. Finally, he saw a big sister carrying a child on her back, standing barefoot on the edge of the road, digging with a hoe. Zhou Weilian walked over and said, "Hello, big sister, you're busy." The woman who was digging with a hoe looked up and down at Zhou Weiguo. "You also escaped from Shanghai, right? I heard that the fighting there was very fierce. A few days ago, a lot of troops passed by here. According to my man, they went to support General Kai's fight against the little devils in Shanghai. This is the first battle of Shanghai, and I should be on my way to apply for the Central Military Academy after regretting my marriage." "Yes, big sister." Knowing the time, Zhou Wei greeted the woman and pointed with a smile, "If you're busy, I'll leave first." After taking a few steps forward, Zhou Wei looked towards the dirt-gray road in the distance, which was blocked by several pine trees, and stopped. He decided not to go to the military academy. He has to go back and apologize to Zhou Jixian and Xiao Ya. Zhou Wan, this scoundrel, is capricious and reckless. Xiao Ya is such a good girl, and the gentle and virtuous appearance of being able to marry is the dream of most men. It's natural to not want such a girl, but he actually regretted his marriage on the wedding day for the sake of a Chen Yi, which is really worse than a beast. Since I have come, I will definitely not do this. He didn't hesitate at the thought and turned around, carrying his suitcase, heading towards Suzhou. Fortunately, it wasn't long before he came out, which was less than a day. With Zhou Wen's memory, he entered Suzhou and found the street where the Zhou family was located. However, before he could pass by happily, he was slapped on the shoulder by someone behind him. Zhou Weiguo turned his head and knew from his memory that it was Lu Zhihui. "Brother, why are you? Brother, you're really not a person. I used to admire you a lot, but this time, you're too bad. You're better than a pig or a dog." Lu Zhihui, dressed in a black suit, looked at Zhou Weiguo with a disgruntled look on his face and muttered, "Brother, you have already left, but what about sister? Law? She has already entered the door. How much gossip will she endure if you refuse to marry? Does she still have the face to go out? Don't scold me, this is your brother's misconduct, not me. I'm coming back to plead guilty and accept the law, right? I heard he came back to apologize. Zhou Wei shrugged and burst into a smile. I knew you were impulsive, but now it's not the right time. Dad's sick and angry. The pistol he kept in the drawer has been loaded. If you go back, you'll have to jump. I'm just worried that you'll regret coming back, so I've been here for 2 days. You're not unaware of his temper. It seems that he can't go back for the time being. Zhou Weiguo lowered his head and thought about pulling Zhou Wei to a tea house, borrowed a piece of paper, and then wrote a letter to pass to Zhou Wei, give it to your sister. In law. If you can't go back, you'll have to find another way out. How Xiao Ya died. He doesn't know, he loves himself. In order not to drag himself down, she committed suicide in Nanjing. How could I possibly let that scene appear again? Absolutely not. Can't there be a total solution? Zhou Weiguo thought for a moment and decided not to go to the military academy. The Central Military Academy does indeed gain intimacy and promotion as soon as you come out, but the problem is that when you come out and persevere, you will become a captain. When the meat grinder in the Battle of Songhu comes out, you don't even know. Moreover, who knows what the military academy is currently taking? Although I am also a graduate of the military academy, the problem is, after all, after so many years have passed, who knows what problems will arise. A place where talents gather, I am not really a person who is amazing. Think about it, military academies are not suitable anymore. It's better to go straight to the front line to fight. There's a possibility of a bike turning into a motorcycle. Brother, where are you going? Zhou Wei glanced at the letter in his hand and raised his eyes to ask. I'll go join the army. Zhou Weiguo picked up a nearby teacup and took a sip, lightly responding to Zhou Wei. Zhou Weiguo put down his teacup, picked up his package, and walked to the door. He turned his head to look at Zhou Wei, who was still in a daze, and said, take care of your sister. In law, wait for me to come back. Better make a chicken head than a phoenix tail. For joining the army, he considered not joining the 19th Route Army. Although the 19th Route Army was brave, they would become rebels and face suppression and withdrawal. Who knows what his efforts will ultimately look like? He has decided to go find the 88th Division of the Central Army. The 88th Division is the legitimate lineage of the Central Army and also a model division of German weapons. It has strong firepower, sufficient power, and the key is the Central Army, which is easy to see from the upper echelons. It appreciates quickly and maintains good value. The best choice to establish a foothold in the military is the 88th Division. Carrying a backpack. Not long after the bleak city of Suzhou, Zhou Weiguo encountered a transportation team heading towards Shanghai on the road. These people were recruited by the local people, dressed in thin clothes, and could be seen shivering in the cold wind. But each of them had a firm gaze as they pushed the unicycle and carried a burden, which was loaded with food. Sent to the troops fighting in Shanghai. I was supposed to go to Shanghai, and with the help of someone along the way, Zhou Weiguo assisted in transporting materials and headed towards Shanghai. He originally planned to bid farewell to this pedestrian outside Shanghai, but the leaders said that the supplies needed to be transported to the military station for handover. Coincidentally, he also inquired about where the 88th Division is currently located. They also arrived at a temporary military station located on the outskirts of Shanghai. Saying it's a military station, it's actually an abandoned warehouse with holes in the roof. If it weren't for the group here and the staff responsible for logging in, someone would believe that even if this ghost didn't come. The staff responsible for registration are from the Shanghai government. This group of people counted and registered the materials, and then had the transporters transport them inside. Zhou Weiguo has been assisting the transportation team in transporting the goods and casually wiping the hot sweat on his forehead with his sleeves. I just took out the cigarette I bought 2 days ago from my wallet. He handed the wrinkled cigarette to the staff responsible for counting with a smile, and Zhou Weiguo lit it for several people before asking, Big brothers, I don't know where the 88th Division is currently. I came specifically from Suzhou to join the army. A slightly chubby clerk looked at Zhou Weiguo and extended his hand to point towards the north of Zhao. You go to Zhou. Yesterday, the 88th Division fought against the Japanese army there. I heard the losses were significant, so they set up a recruitment office there. Yes, that's right. Where are you going on Sichuan Road? Where are they? When I passed by this afternoon, I saw many people queuing up there. The slightly thinner person also added. Confirm the position of Commander 88. After thanking these few people 3 times, Zhou Weiguo rushed to Zhubei's Sichuan Road. Sure enough, we found the Independent Brigade 1st Regiment of the 88th Division recruiting soldiers in the middle section of Sichuan Road. There are at least a few hundred people standing in line as soldiers here. Watching this group of young people endure the cold wind and queue up, Zhou Weiguo was filled with excitement and thought to himself, how could China die with such a passionate man? A queue with relatively fewer people was selected to stand at the back. Zhou Weiguo endured the cold wind step by step, almost moving forward with the flow of people close to his body. After waiting for almost half an hour, when it was his turn, he smiled and said to the emaciated major who was registering his head, "Sir, I have signed up to join the army." End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Let me give it a try. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Let me give it a try. The lean yet energetic major looked up at Zhou Weiguo and picked up a pen to begin his hometown, age, and education. Zhou Weiguo finished explaining Zhou Wen's age and hometown one by one, paused for a moment, and then took out his student ID from Dongwu University and placed it on a dark table, adding, "I am a student from Dongwu University." Upon hearing that Zhou Weiguo was a student at Dongwu University, the major couldn't help but take a closer look at him and then pick up his student ID to observe, putting it down. After pondering for a moment, the major picked up his pen and lowered his head to write on a piece of paper. After finishing, he took a seal from the edge and casually handed it to Zhou Weiguo. "Go to the back to collect your military uniform, gather here, and someone will take you there." Thanks to the major, Zhou Weiguo walked towards the place that looked like a warehouse, and he lowered his head to look at the paper in his hand. Zhou Weiguo, 88th Division, 3 battalions, 1 platoon leader. How could it be a platoon leader? Did the major make a mistake in writing? Zhou Weiguo turned back slightly to ask, but the soldier in charge of distributing materials shouted in front of him. He could only pass the note to an officer in charge of distributing military uniforms with confusion. After reading the note, the officer turned around and left to retrieve a set of light green military uniforms and a second lieutenant's collar for Zhou Weiguo. He filled out the collar on his chest and handed it to Zhou Weiguo. "I really don't understand. Looking at my military uniform and the assigned Mauser rifle." Zhou Weiguo didn't understand why he was a platoon leader. He saw a second lieutenant coming over and quickly went over with a smile, asking why it was for. The second lieutenant's response made him understand. The Shanghai conflict resulted in heavy losses for both sides. Zhubei, guarded by the 88th Division, was a key attack direction for the Japanese army. Frontline officers had already died, and the division headquarters could not supplement them. Therefore, it was ordered to select some educated soldiers from the recruited soldiers to serve as frontline officers. As a college student, I naturally have no suspense about becoming a frontline commander. A commander who goes up may not come back either. Looking back in shock at the words of the second lieutenant who had gone far away, Zhou Weiguo looked at his military uniform and muttered to himself, "Is this going to become cannon fodder?" Trembling for a moment, he looked up towards Zhubei with a cold gaze and thought to himself, "The bullets and shells that want me to die have not been made yet." With outstanding skills and abilities, Zhou Weiguo, who had rested for less than half a day and went to the battlefield, not only did not break any oil skin on the battlefield, but also because of his bravery in several battles, he killed a Japanese lieutenant yesterday, and a company commander was killed yesterday. He was promoted to the position of acting company commander. I haven't been serving as the acting company leader for half a day yet. The 3rd Battalion was ordered to go to the Jin family mansion to provide support, cooperate with friendly forces, and completely annihilate hundreds of Japanese troops stationed in the Jin family mansion, thereby crushing the Japanese plan to occupy the temple and cutting off the connection between the 19th Route Army and the 5th Army. After receiving the order, the 3rd Battalion set off at around 4 o'clock in the morning and arrived at the Jin family mansion at 10 o'clock in the morning. They were sealed and deployed in the 2nd attacking echelon, which was about 350 meters away from the Jin family mansion. The artillery of the 88th Division is conducting a cover attack on Japanese positions. Amidst the sound of gunfire, Zhou Weiguo, who was lying in front of a crater waiting for the order to attack, felt that something was wrong. During this period of confrontation with the Japanese army, once their own artillery suppresses them, the Japanese army will soon use 10 times more shells to counter-suppress them. But today, this artillery has been firing for about 10 minutes now, and there has been no movement from the Japanese artillery. It's hard to say. He thought for a moment and turned his head to see the battalion commander Wu Yong in the bullet pit not far from his right, so he climbed over and pouted, "Captain, is the situation not right?" Wu Yong-chang, the commander of the 3rd Battalion, not only had a rough appearance, but also had a mustache on his face. With a fierce expression on his face, he slightly glanced at the next weak state of Wei. "What's wrong with that?" "That's not right, I really can't say it myself." Zhou Weiguo lowered his head and pondered, but before he could think it over, the charge horn behind him sounded, and the first tier of troops began to attack. "You're talking nonsense, there's nothing wrong." Wu Yong's voice increased by an eighth. "It's just that he hasn't finished speaking yet." Sudden protrusions bulged, the crisp sound of Type 92 Japanese heavy machine guns rang out. Zhou Weiguo hurriedly looked forward. 2 Type 92 heavy machine guns were used to conceal the firepower points of the fortress, forming a crossfire from the front and the back, suppressing the charging army. More than 200 people in the first echelon were suppressed on the ground by machine guns and unable to lift their heads. 100 meters behind the machine gunner, a team of Japanese artillery appeared, setting up 92 infantry guns. They were beyond the range of the mortar, and the artillery of the 88th Division could not suppress them at all. Zhou Weiguo estimated it. If those few infantry guns were to fire, the soldiers who were suppressed in front would have to die in large numbers. "Captain Wu, I have received an order from your unit to immediately launch an attack, respond to the suppressed brother troops, and cover their evacuation." The messenger from the regimental headquarters came to convey the order and supervised its execution in the 3rd Battalion. After reading the command, Wu Yong took a deep breath, bit his mouth tightly, and sighed as if making a command he was unwilling to accept. "Command, 1st Company to provide firepower cover, 2nd and 3rd Companies to flank and attack, attracting enemy firepower and allowing." "Captain, we can't fight like this. Not only can we get caught up in this fight, but the troops in front of us also want to come back." Hearing Wu Yong's arrangement, Zhou Weiguo took a detour. The Japanese army's firepower points are cross-deployed, with a wide range of shooting angles. No matter how they attack and cover from any angle, they are within their range. The enemy is not a rascal, and they will definitely use artillery to strike the suppressed infantry in front, which is too late to attract firepower. The only way. Only by defeating their machine gunners and clearing the obstacles ahead. The army rushed forward and became entangled with the Japanese bayonet, which turned red. The Japanese artillery was also decommissioned. "We won this battle." Wu Yong didn't understand why Zhou Weiguo's suggestion was the most appropriate, and he also thought of such a way. "However, at a distance of over 300 meters, I couldn't even defeat the opponent's machine gunner. Not to mention myself, the entire 5th Army couldn't find anyone who could defeat the opponent's machine gunner at such a long distance. I can only use this helpless method myself." "I know what you mean, but..." Wu Yong sighed. Zhou Weiguo looked at the Japanese machine gunner in the distance. After licking his slightly cracked lips, Zhou Weiguo put his shotgun into the holster. He reached out and took a Mauser rifle from a nearby soldier, pulled the bolt and skillfully loaded it with bullets. He then opened the auxiliary shooting device and said, "Let me give it a try." What, he wants to give it a try, did I hear him right? Wu Yong's mouth widened in surprise. How did he feel? He heard the funniest sentence. Zhou Weiguo in front of him seemed to want to shoot the enemy's machine gunner from here. Are you crazy? This is over 300 meters, and the enemy's firepower point is just the size of a copper coin. What is he joking about? Wu Yong widened his eyes with a look of disbelief. People around won't believe it either. They're over 300 meters away and want to shoot down the enemy machine gunner. Not to mention this regiment, even the entire brigade, division, and even the entire 5th Army cannot find such a person. Unless it's a fairy. But Captain Zhou in front of him wants to shoot the opponent's machine gunner, is that possible? With a questioning and mocking look, Zhou Weiguo didn't want to pay attention. He just thought about it. Capable of quickly issuing orders for rescue. It's not possible to be a regimental commander or even a division commander, but rather the few people in the cover above. They must know the powerful relationship between them. I don't want to use my nepotism with Captain Zhang to enter the army, but that doesn't mean I can't let him see my abilities. Rather than starting in a place that no one knows. It's better to act as a battalion commander and a messenger for the regiment headquarters, as well as this place where the command center can observe. Defeat the enemy machine gunner. Firstly, clear the obstacles. Secondly, once someone is found to investigate, there will be no top-tier individuals. Zhou Weiguo, who had slightly closed his eyes, extended his tongue to try out the direction of the wind. The southwest wind is slightly north, and the degree of rheumatism is negligible. While silently reciting the data, Zhou Weiguo slowly moved the muzzle to the right by an inch, and then slightly lifted the muzzle upwards. Pop! In the midst of ridicule and disbelief from the crowd, Zhou Weiguo pulled the trigger. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Japanese Tanks. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Japanese Tanks. The crisp sound of gunfire. Bringing people around back to reality from various thoughts. Wu Yong trembled and quickly looked at the Japanese fighter gunner with his binoculars in his hand. This guy was a blind cat who ran into a dead mouse just now. Wu Yong turned his head in surprise and looked at Zhou Weiguo, who was withdrawing his shell, with a dementia in his eyes. Just now, he saw that the military aircraft gunner was actually shot dead with his head tilted to death. Pulling the bolt, reloading, and aiming, Zhou Weiguo ignored Wu Yong's surprised gaze. As if no one else was aiming at the other machine gunner, the moment the gunfire rang out, the machine gun on the other side was once again mute. Coincidence, it must be a coincidence. No one can do it, no one, this must be a coincidence. This is absolutely pop. Another gunshot rang out, the firm belief in Wu Yong's heart that it was a blind cat encountering a dead mouse and a coincidence was shattered. If one is luck and two are coincidences, then this third time is definitely not a coincidence, but the Zhou Weiguo in front of him. It's true. He really has this ability. The front troops are attacking, but they have lost a lot of troops. The second-tier offensive charge sounded. Wu Yong, who was still stunned, reacted and operated a rifle beside him, jumping out of the crater. Brothers, hurry up with me and kill him, you bastard. He ran a few steps forward and turned to look at Zhou Weiguo, who was still crawling on the ground. Zhou Weiguo, suppress their machine gunners. Zhou Weiguo remained expressionless, just mechanically withdrawing and loading ammunition. He only has one idea. No matter who it is today, whoever dares to move those two heavy machine guns will take their own life. The configuration of a heavy machine gunner involves 3 people working together. 1 machine gunner, 1 reserve machine gunner, and 1 ammunition loader. Zhou Weiguo confirmed that he had taken out the configuration of his 2 machine guns before shifting the muzzle to the middle of the 2 heavy machine guns. He wanted to ensure that no enemy could approach these two heavy machine guns. After confirming that there were no Japanese troops touching those two machine guns, Zhou Weiguo got up and chased after the 3rd Battalion with his rifle. The first echelon of troops has been almost completely depleted. The 3rd Battalion has now become the vanguard, and Zhou Weiguo, who is not far or near following behind the troops, can already see the remnants of the Japanese army at Jinjiazhai cursing and carrying rifles as they charge out of the position. It seems that they are going to engage in a fierce battle with the 3rd Battalion, put on the bayonet. Captain Wu Yong's shout came from afar. Zhou Weiguo understood his intention. At such a close distance, firearms can easily reach one's own people, and the best and most effective way at present is to see the red light of the bayonet in blade combat. Without a bayonet, Zhou Weiguo crouched down and drew a bayonet from a soldier who had sacrificed himself on the side. He then mounted it on his gun and charged towards the Japanese army. As soon as they collided, both sides screamed and cursed, the sound of bones shattering, the popping sound of bayonets piercing their skin, and the sound of soldiers participating when they were dying could be heard endlessly. Facing him, Zhou Weiguo encountered a Japanese military commander. The soldier Chao shouted loudly and charged towards him with a .38 rifle. The Japanese army's old 3 types of fighting techniques were not enough for Zhou Weiguo to see. After flanking General Chao Rang, he took off the bayonet and stabbed him in the back with a backhand. Watching Bing Chao fall in pain, Zhou Weiguo threw his rifle without a bayonet at another Japanese army rushing towards him. With the help of the enemy's evasive time, he rushed forward with an arrow step to take his bayonet and thrust it into the opponent's throat. Is this product a killing god? Wu Yong's eyes were almost not enough to see. Zhou Weiguo was already trembling with shock when he used his rifle to suppress the opponent's machine gun at a distance of about 350 meters. Now, this guy was like entering an uninhabited territory, and with so many Japanese soldiers, he seemed to rush towards him, almost causing him to bite his own tongue. Take a look, he only killed 1 Japanese soldier himself, and 3 of them died in his hands. All the moves were killing moves, and 1 move was fatal. It's really amazing. Zhou Weiguo wiped the neck of the Japanese army again and then glanced at a Japanese lieutenant holding a commanding knife. The 2nd lieutenant clearly showed a sense of fear in his eyes. Come on. Zhou Weiguo angrily widened his eyes and reached out, pointing to the still dripping bayonet in his hand. He let out a little shout. The 2nd lieutenant not only prevented this roar from coming. Instead, it was given to run in other directions. Cowardly, Zhou Weiguo vigorously threw out his bayonet and inserted it into the lieutenant's chest. I heard the screams before his death that Zhou Weiguo had not yet rushed towards another Japanese army. The piercing whistling sound in the air made him lift his head and look over. The dark black spots are speeding towards this direction. Trembling, he looked around and started drinking loudly, concealed, with shells. Bang, bang, bang bang, bang, bang. He's really not a human, he's just a dog like a beast. Zhou Weiguo, who hurriedly hid in front of a broken wall to avoid Japanese shells, watched as the falling shells blew up 5 or 6 Japanese soldiers who were unable to hide. He couldn't help but curse at the Japanese scumbags. He had long heard from other troops that when the Japanese attacked, his own people would explode. At that time, he was somewhat skeptical, but now he believes it. A fierce bombardment not only destroyed our own people who were unable to avoid in the future, but also destroyed the Japanese army on the battlefield. The entire battlefield surprisingly had no sound of fighting, only occasional cries of injury and illness, as well as insults from the Japanese army towards the rear artillery. Zhou Weiguo still cursed the despicable and shameless Japanese army in his heart. Wu Yong, who was still alive, came to the edge of Zhou Weiguo from the nearby bullet pit and casually sat down with a smile, pushing Zhou Weiguo. Have you learned martial arts before? This damn it. Just now, I just had a quick kill and forgot to keep a low profile. Now, how do I answer this? Zhou Weiguo lowered his head and stared at the bayonet in his hand, trying to find a suitable reason to evade. Before he could find a suitable reason, the ground began to tremble slightly, and some broken tiles on the edge were also sliding to the side. And at the same time, there seemed to be the roar and click of machines. Did the earthquake occur? The people around looked around in shock, looking around to find the source of the vibration. Enemy tank. The frightened shout from the observation post. The living soldiers began to move forward vigorously in search of favorable terrain, climbed on the ground, and aimed their guns at the outside. Zhou Weiguo climbed up a few steps and poked his head out. 3 Japanese tanks were standing side by side, firing shells as they moved, while the machine guns on top were firing bullets with a clattering sound. Behind them, at least 1 battalion of troops followed. The machine gunner suppresses, the blaster prepares, go up and blow him up. The captain's voice shouted not far away. The main force of the regiment has just arrived. The regimental leader deployed while letting the blaster carry the explosive charge to blow up the approaching tank. I failed again. Zhou Weiguo took a look and saw that several explorers from the 2nd Battalion, carrying explosive bags, had not yet run forward for more than 10 meters when the Japanese army killed them and fell to the ground. And the second wave, the third wave, was knocked to the ground just as they were on the battlefield. In less than 2 minutes, more than 10 soldiers died. His mother, damn it, let me go. Wu Yong, who was beside Zhou Weiguo, swore and was about to rush out of the bunker. Zhou Weiguo pulled him down when he saw the situation. Wu Yong, who was pulled by this, fiercely stared at Zhou Weiguo. What are you doing? You know, once the tank comes over, we're all doomed. How could Zhou Weiguo not know what the Japanese army was doing? They used tanks to cover the infantry attack behind them, used tank fire and machine guns to form the first wave of firepower, and then the following infantry launched a second round of attack. Finally, they charged forward. So the troops here are also considered scrapped. He understood the meaning of the battalion commander, using his own experience and sacrifice to blow up Japanese tanks and salvage the current passive situation. He had heard of Wu Yong blowing up Japanese tanks in Zhubei, but that was Zhubei. Wu Yong could use the terrain and debris to approach the target. And what is this place? This is the Jin family mansion, a flat Jin family mansion. If you go out and give it a try, you'll have to be sieved. Why go out with a burst of blood, knowing it's a death, to give someone a head? Zhou Weiguo raised his eyes and looked at Wu Yong, who was staring at him with an angry expression. He pointed his finger down at the approaching tank and said, Captain, can I kill him? End of this chapter. Chapter 4. You, the platoon leader, have intimidated me. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. You, the platoon leader, have intimidated me. You. Wu Yong twisted his head stiffly and stared blankly at Zhou Weiguo. He couldn't bear to digest Zhou Weiguo's words in his heart. I can get rid of him. Wu Yong's facial expression was twisted like a bitter gourd, and his beard was erect. He stared at Zhou Weiguo with wide eyes and then pointed his hand slightly towards the direction of the Japanese tank, saying, Do you know what that is? Tanks. What else could it be? However, for Zhou Weiguo, the Japanese tanks could not truly be considered tanks. Although the Japanese military-industrial enterprises were strong, their lack of resources allowed them to engage in military activities while also reducing some raw materials without any restraint or bottom line. This tank is also a deformed product. The Japanese army is on par with Britain in everything, but they have learned something different. The tanks that came over here have thin skin, big filling, and weak protection. This kind of thing is bullying the current impoverished China. Even their machine guns within 100 meters can shoot several large holes in tanks. When compared with European and American countries, these Japanese tanks are nothing but scum. Do you still know it's a tank? I thought you didn't know. Wu Yong paused after listening to Zhou Weiguo's response with a sour sarcastic remark. With a slight sigh, Wu Yong extended his hand meaningfully and patted Zhou Weiguo's shoulder. All right, I know you said that to comfort me, but you also need to know that tanks cannot be destroyed. Our team will suffer heavy losses today, and I have successfully destroyed tanks here. Don't worry, I will protect myself. Zhou Weiguo saw that he had taken off his armed belt and was going to take off his boots to reduce his weight. He reached out his hand to stop Wu Yong, then extended his finger towards the distance and turned his head to look at Wu Yong with a positive gaze. Captain, I can really get rid of him. The look in Wu Yong's eyes melted the impossibility in his heart, and he tentatively pointed to the approaching tank, stuttering and tilting his neck. Can you really take care of it? It's not that I don't believe it, but it's unbelievable. What did Zhou Weiguo use to fight, with the rifle in his hand, or Zhou Weiguo knew what he was thinking? It was a tank, and in their subconscious, it was not easy to explode and had to be stacked with people. But it's difficult for them, but for themselves, it's really not difficult. If you encounter tanks from other countries, there's no way today, but if it's the same thing today, let's forget about it. Zhou Weiguo bit his lip and nodded, observing the tank slowly approaching from the opposite side again. I'm sure I can get rid of him, but I need something. Once again, Wu Yong's affirmation has changed from disbelief to belief, or in other words, his inner self now has an attitude of treating a dead horse as a living horse doctor. Zhou Weiguo, standing over 300 meters in front of him, killed the Japanese fighter gunner in disbelief. Perhaps this time, he could once again create a miracle for himself and the entire team. As long as he needs it, he will find a way to get it now. I need a mortar. Zhou Weiguo glanced at Wu Yong thoughtfully, word for word. Mortar. That's for suppressing enemy infantry, not for fighting tanks. Zhou Weiguo actually thought Wu Yong, who was supposed to believe it, once again faced difficulties. After all, this was not something of the same level. Tanks needed to use battle guns, not mortars. Captain, do you have any other options? One more minute, our army will face one more danger. One more moment of hesitation, one more soldier will sacrifice. I promise you, we will definitely take him down. Wu Yong's hesitant gaze became somewhat confused. He lowered his head to look at his toes, then turned his gaze to the scene of the exploding blaster being hit again, rolling and howling in the distance, and looking at the tank spraying anger. An angry punch hit the ground. He looked at Zhou Weiguo. Wait for me, I'll go get it for you now. More than 200 meters away, machine gunners on Japanese tanks were firing indiscriminately. During the waiting period for Wu Yong, Zhou Weiguo used his rifle to suppress Japanese machine guns. When knocking out the fourth machine gunner, Zhou Weiguo, who had withdrawn his ammunition, heard the chaotic footsteps and noise behind him. Woo-hoo, I've never heard of mortars hitting tanks before. Are you crazy? Artillery Company Commander Zhang Yu shouted with anger. Little by Lien, I have no other choice. If we don't take out the tank today, our regiment will be ruined. I have no choice but to trust him now. Wu Yong's voice also came over. Zhou Weiguo turned his head to look. Wu Yong was rushing towards this place, resisting the artillery barrel. He held the barrel tightly to the right, afraid of being snatched away by others. Meanwhile, Zhang Yu, a little white face raised in the Jiangnan water town, ran with a worried expression while looking at his mortar. It was probably Wu Yong, the foolish one, who hit the barrel. Behind the two, another soldier followed slowly, carrying the shell and sitting on the bottom. Wu Yong saw Zhou Weiguo and quickened his steps, throwing the barrel onto the ground and panting twice, pointing to the barrel. I got something for you. Jiang Yu squatted on the ground and looked at Zhou Weiguo for a while before turning her head to look at Wu Yong with disdain. Woo-hoo, you said he could use a mortar to shoot down a tank. Are you crazy? Artillery, I'm the professional. If I say I can't shoot, then I can't. Then you come. They say they can, but you can't. Who do I trust? Zhou Weiguo ignored the bickering between the two and instead instructed the following artillery to set up cannons. However, he peeked out and squinted his eyes to observe the Japanese tanks. Zhou Weiguo's face was solemnly pondering as he estimated. The Japanese tank was 235 meters away from them. To destroy it, they had to use the high-speed sprint of mortars to penetrate the tank and explode inside. If there was too much propellant, they had to penetrate, but if there was too little, they could not penetrate, let alone explode inside. Having observed factors such as the enemy's tank speed and wind speed, Zhou Weiguo turned around and ignored the two still struggling about whether the mortar could hit the tank. He glanced sideways at the two half-squatting artillery soldiers. Target, Japanese tank number 1 in the center of the front, with a northwest wind of 3 levels and a density adjustment of 311.101. Reduce height by 1. Turn right by 2 degrees. Zhou Weiguo's words stopped Zhang Yu from making sarcastic remarks. He squinted his eyes and looked at Zhou Weiguo, who was crawling on the ground reporting data. Then, he slowly looked at the two soldiers who were frantically manipulating and didn't know what he was thinking. Suddenly, the contemplative Zhang Yu crawled over like lightning and pulled the two soldiers aside, controlling the shelling in a semi-squatting manner, saying, "You're just dragging around. When you adjust, there's nothing left." Wu Yong and Zhang Yu stood in front of him, looking at his serious expression. He crawled over and half-squatted on the ground, pointing to Zhou Weiguo who was observing ahead. "Didn't you say he couldn't do it?" Zhang Yu glanced askance at Zhou Weiguo, his lips trembling and stuttering. "I believe that artillery can't hit tanks, but I found out that you. This platoon leader is a bit unusual, me. I really let him intimidate me. Maybe he can really take down tanks today. Huff it up." Wu Yong was a bit confused when he heard these words. He knew Zhang Yu very well and had always believed that artillery was a technical unit. He had his nose in the air all day, and no one was fooled. Today, he was able to make him say these words. He extended his finger in surprise and asked Zhou Weiguo, who was crawling on the ground and half lifting his head, to Zhang Yu, who was carefully adjusting in front of him, "Why do you say he scared you?" End of this chapter. Chapter 5. He still wants to choose between two options. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. He still wants to choose between two options. Artillery is not infantry. Artillery is a technical unit that requires instruments to judge wind speed and other factors, and then adjust the artillery accordingly using wind speed to make predictions before hitting the target. Infantry, on the other hand, don't have to worry too much. They can aim and pull the trigger to kill someone, not at a long distance. In front of him, Zhou Weiguo was able to make wind speed judgments without using instruments, and even began reporting data in less than 3 seconds. The key was that his data was accurate and impressive. Zhang Yu had never seen such a person before, even her own teacher did not have this ability. Just now, his hesitation was just thinking about the data and wind speed reported by Zhou Weiguo. Based on that estimate, the opponent was really dealing with the middle tank. He still believed in the fact that mortars could not hit tanks, but Zhou Weiguo's data and judgment forced him to come and assist. "What do you mean? Can he really knock it off?" Wu Yong surprised and extended his finger to Zhou Weiguo not far away. Zhang Yu shook her head slightly. "I don't know, but theoretically, it's impossible," he added, looking forward again and bowing his head to ponder. "At least I don't think it's possible." Unable to get an answer, Wu Yong climbed up to Zhou Weiguo and saw him staring sternly at the enemy tank. He squinted his eyes and asked with some anticipation, "Can it really be knocked down?" Zhou Weiguo didn't look at Wu Yong, just let out a sigh and estimated the opponent's speed and the amount of gunpowder to be loaded again. After confirmation, when Zhou Weiguo turned his head, he saw that Zhang Yu was operating it. He was stunned for a moment and still opened his mouth. "Number 4 charge, ready for launch." Zhou Weiguo raised his hand slightly and forcefully slid it down and let out a loud shout, "Release." Bang! The artillery shook slightly. At a speed visible to the naked eye, the tank walking in the middle exploded with a loud roar, causing a huge impact that directly blew up the tank turret. The scattered flames ignited the infantry that followed, burning several Japanese soldiers into flames and causing them to scream and roll on the ground. What a god! Upon hearing the cheers of the soldiers around him, Wu Yong's eyes were about to burst out. He didn't expect that Zhou Weiguo would really use mortars to destroy tanks. Zhou Weiguo got up and ran to Jiang Yu's side. He wrapped his hand in his sleeve and grabbed the hot barrel before running. Looking back, he saw Wu Yong still crawling there in a daze. He shouted, "Captain, run quickly, the Japanese artillery is coming. As soon as the shell is fired, the Japanese army will retaliate quickly, making the area 10,000 points unsafe." Bang, bang, bang just entered another place. Before Zhou Weiguo could lay down the mortar barrel, the place where the shells had just stopped caused dust to fly. Without hearing anything outside the window, Zhou Weiguo, who was solely focused on enemy tanks, lowered his gun barrel and climbed up a few steps to observe the movements of Japanese tanks. At the moment the tank was knocked down, Jiang Yu had an indescribable smell in his heart. He had already begun to doubt whether what the book and the teacher had told him was truly right. Unable to understand and shocked, he installed cannons without complaint. "My day, Jiang Yu, your artillery company is wasting it. It's just one shell, and there are 2 tanks left." Wu Yong, who was resisting the shell and opening it, pointed to the empty box with a shell and shouted. Zhou Weiguo, who was observing, heard that there were not enough shells. After hearing that Jiang Yu wanted to go to the back to retrieve them, he turned around and looked at Jiang Yu, who had already turned around and ran back. "Captain, 1 shell is enough." "What?" Wu Yong almost didn't scare the shell in his hand and it fell to the ground, while Jiang Yu showed a frightened expression and stared at Zhou Weiguo like a monster. In their hearts, there is only one idea. Is this guy a devil? The mortar took out the tank, which was already an incredible move, but Zhou Weiguo actually wanted to. Surprisingly, "I want to choose between 2. This is completely beyond the theoretical tolerance of the 2. Of course, Zhou Weiguo knew what their expressions were trying to convey. It is impossible for mortars to take down 2 enemy tanks, or even to blow up one. But this refers to thick armored tanks, which were capable of being hit by the Japanese army. However, this requires a condition where the opponent's 2 tanks are advancing side by side. The current position is on the side of the tank. Wait until those 2 tanks have the same current speed or come to a stop. As long as you destroy the weak armor tracks of the first tank and continue to hit the second tank with shells, you can scrap it. Besides, time is running out. We retrieved the shells from behind and estimated that the Japanese tanks had already killed them." Zhou Weiguo spat and talked about the possibility among them. Jiang Yu looked at Zhou Weiguo with blood boiling in her eyes, while Wu Yong felt more confused because he didn't understand. The passionate gaze gradually faded, eventually becoming disappointment. Jiang Yu lowered her head and pondered for a moment, still turning around and running away. "I'll go get the shells, it's simply impossible. The mortar flies in a curved line, not a tank gun flying in a straight line. If it hits, it means it is about to land, while the opponent's other tank, although approaching to provide cover for the infantry behind, is separated by 2 meters. These 2 meters are obstacles that mortars cannot cross." "How did he run?" Wu Yong responded and asked, pointing to Jiang Yu, who had already run 7 or 8 meters and coming to Zhou Weiguo's side. Zhou Weiguo bit his lip, because in his mind, artillery cannot shoot directly. Even fools know that direct fire is not allowed, and the gun rack does not allow it. Although Wu Yong is not an artillery soldier, he has never eaten pork and has seen pigs run away. He understands that Jiang Yu is right, mortars cannot shoot directly. Zhou Weiguo glanced slightly at the mortar beside him and extended his hand to strike the barrel. "Captain, what if I don't use a gun rack?" "Ah. No need for a gun rack." Zhou Weiguo did not give Wu Yong more time to think about this issue. The front troops are facing the firepower suppression of Japanese tanks, and the Japanese machine gunners behind are also crawling on the ground to suppress the ground. Time won't allow him to consider it anymore. The speed of the tank has once again slowed down, possibly to avoid bullets piercing armor and accidentally killing the tank driver. If the Japanese artillery covers it later, the enemy launches an attack, and the tank marches quickly, then there is really no chance for oneself to shoot it down. The position is not suitable, which is relatively high. If the shell is loaded, it forms an oblique shot. Zhou Weiguo looked around and found a destroyed house 30 meters away. The damaged house had a section of broken eaves and walls that could withstand the recoil of the mortar, without affecting his shooting. Carrying the gun barrel, Wu Yong bent forward and hurried forward. Seeing this, he could only helplessly hold the shell and followed Zhou Weiguo behind. The broad view made the Japanese army believe that there would be no enemy here, so no one noticed it. This allows him to calmly respond. Zhou Weiguo placed the gun barrel aside and quickly took off his clothes. In the cold wind blowing, his cold white skin instantly became angry and goosebumps trembled. He wrapped all his clothes around the handgun barrel and then flattened the barrel. The bottom of the barrel clung to the hard red brick wall before starting to visually measure the speed of the opponent's tank and calculate the wind speed. In the end, he determined his position and licked his lower lip, then tightly hugged the barrel and looked at Wu Yong beside him in confusion. "Captain, do me a favor." End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Hand-to-hand fighting. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Hand-to-hand fighting. Wu Yong looked at him completely puzzled. At the moment when Zhou Weiguo called him, he realized and came to Zhou Weiguo's side, confused and asking, "What do you want me to do?" A flat-end artillery cannot allow the shell to slide naturally, and requires external force to forcefully hit it to trigger the firing pin. Zhou Weiguo couldn't let go, so he had to ask Wu Yong to stuff the shell into the muzzle and then use a wooden stick to hit it harder to thrust the shell in. After listening to Zhou Weiguo's words, Wu Yong put down his shell and found a table leg from the destroyed house. He then placed the shell at the muzzle according to Zhou Weiguo's instructions. "What am I going to do next?" Wu Yong asked Zhou Weiguo with a somewhat afraid eye, like a student looking at a teacher. Zhou Weiguo pointed at the table leg in his hand with his mouth and said, "Later, I'll have the battalion commander poke it in and then poke it in. It needs to be fast and strong, and once you poke it in, you should use the fastest speed to pull out the table leg, otherwise the shell will hit you. It's quite dangerous." Zhou Weiguo really wants to control it himself, at least with a higher safety factor and corresponding confidence. However, the problem is that he needs to control the direction of the gun barrel without deviation, so he can only let Wu Yong in front of him take risks. Listening to the danger, General Wu Yong took off his hat and wiped the faint sweat seeping out of his forehead, saying, "Okay." The tank came to a stop, and Zhou Weiguo shifted the barrel slightly. The battalion commander takes action. Wu Yong fiercely hit the table leg against the bullet head and hurriedly pulled out the table leg to throw it away, hugging his own head and crawling to the side. Bang! The artillery trembled slightly and fired the shells out. Even though the hard walls were able to counteract a significant amount of recoil, Zhou Weiguo still felt like his whole body was about to fall apart. Unable to bear the rolling sensation in his abdomen, he vomited a mouthful of blood and sat limply on the ground. In the distance, there was a roar, and Zhou Weiguo wiped the blood seeping from the corner of his mouth with his sleeve, showing a proud smile. He saw that the tracks of the first tank were broken, the second one exploded directly, and the steel bunker that the Japanese army had moved was scrapped. "Let's go." Wu Yong lay on the ground, ignoring the thick smoke from the tank explosion. As he turned his head, he had already seen the Japanese infantry machine gunner turning his gun and aiming towards this side. With a loud shout, he got up and turned to run, only to see the bloodstains at the corner of Zhou Weiguo's mouth and the mouthful of blood on the ground. He hurriedly pulled Zhou Weiguo up and carried him on his back, running behind him. On Wu Yong's back, Zhou Weiguo listened to his gasping breath and forcefully swallowed the blood he wanted to vomit. Zhou Weiguo's breath flowed like a thread. "Captain, I was injured by the recoil shock." "Don't worry, just rest for a while." You should tell the regimental commander to rush into hand-to-hand combat and not give the Japanese a chance to use artillery coverage. The tank has been destroyed, and the Japanese army will definitely use artillery to cover this area. This is not far from the Japanese army, so we have to take a new approach, endure some casualties, and go up and fight with bayonets to prevent the Japanese from using artillery. Shut up, you're okay with spitting blood. You're a fairy. Don't talk, I'll take you to the field hospital, Wu Yong cursed in front of him, as if his tone was off. His voice softened and he added, the troops have already gone up. Up there. Zhou Weiguo listened attentively and indeed heard cries of killing, as well as the sound of Type 92 heavy machine guns and the screams of soldiers. With a frown, Zhou Weiguo patted Wu Yong's shoulder and said, Captain, please don't back off. I'm fine, You'll take me back to the front. I have to suppress the enemy machine gunner, otherwise our brothers will die for nothing. In this battle, we are not as good as the other party. We have the advantage of using more people to fight against the Japanese army. If we let the other party defeat a part of it, even if they repel the Japanese army, they may suffer heavy losses. I just suffered a slight injury to my recoil just now, and it didn't hurt my muscles or bones. To retreat now is to ignore my comrades, which is not what Zhou Weiguo wants to see. Wu Yong, who was running, stopped and was stunned for a moment. In the end, he carried Zhou Weiguo on his back and came to a broken wall to put him down. Seeing him shirtless, Wu Yong took off his military uniform and draped it over him. He then picked up a rifle from the side and loaded it onto him, looking meaningfully at Zhou Weiguo's pale face in front of him. You must not die. Zhou Weiguo hummed and looked at Wu Yong, who was carrying his rifle, with a hint of a smile as he pulled the bolt and aimed at a machine gunner on the side of the tank. Pop gunshots rang out, and the machine gunner across from him also fell to the side, losing his life. After withdrawing the bullet, he aimed and fired again. His heart has been changing a little bit. If he had shot the Japanese machine gunner not long ago just to show it to the higher-ups, then now he really doesn't want the Japanese army to slaughter too many innocent brothers. At the moment when both sides were entangled, all the guns and artillery had lost their effectiveness, and the entire battlefield was filled with language that was incomprehensible to each other, engaged in verbal abuse and assault. The lack of training allowed him to see a group of brothers who were almost 2 and 3 unable to deal with the other Japanese army. He saw that in order to kill a Japanese army, some soldiers would rather intentionally collide and grab Japanese firearms with their hands, making it impossible for them to withdraw, thus causing the nearby brothers to stab them to death. But more often than not, in a helpless situation, they grabbed the Japanese army and fired their grenades, sacrificing their lives for each other. Damn you, Zhou Weiguo stood with angry eyes wide open, pulling out 2 bayonets from the soldiers who died in battle and running towards Wu Yong in the direction with his snow-white body, shirtless. He saw that Wu Yong was being pushed by the 3 Japanese soldiers without any defense. If it were later, Wu Yong would probably have to die at the hands of the other side. Wu Yong was also a very unlucky one. His coat was given to Zhou Weiguo, and he was the only one wearing a shirt on the entire battlefield. The Japanese army considered him a senior officer and immediately organized manpower to focus on taking care of him. Wu Yong, a tough warrior, was difficult to defeat with 4 hands. His rifle caught the enemy's piercing rifle, but a Japanese soldier kicked his abdomen and stepped back several steps, trampling on a corpse and rolling on the ground. Watching 3 bayonets rushing towards him, he knew he couldn't get rid of it and could only place his hand on the edge of the grenade, ready to carry a few backpacks on his deathbed. He was about to pull the grenade, but the screams made him open his eyes. Like a god of killing, Zhou Weiguo, who was shirtless, stood in front of him. In his hand, a bayonet pierced into the throat of one Japanese soldier, while another Japanese soldier had a bayonet inserted into his chest, which was clearly meant for him to kill. Zhou Weiguo rushed over just for Wu Yong, but fortunately, he arrived in a tight and urgent situation. He threw out his bayonet and stabbed one to death, then used his bayonet to deal with the other. Before Zhou Weiguo could react, he pulled out his bayonet and dodged his charge, grabbed his armed belt, and stabbed him from the back. "Captain, are you okay?" After dealing with these 3 Japanese soldiers, Zhou Weiguo didn't wipe the blood off his cheeks and turned to look at Wu Yong with concern. Wu Yong got up and picked up his rifle, gasping for breath. "It's okay. Is this guy still human?" Wu Yong swallowed his saliva and looked at Zhou Weiguo, who had once again infiltrated the Japanese army. For a long time, he didn't understand whether Zhou Weiguo was actually human. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. This opportunity cannot be missed. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. This opportunity cannot be missed. The battle between the two sides in the Jin family's mansion continued, and the angry soldiers used all available weapons in an attempt to put the other person to death and drive them away. I don't know if the Japanese army received the order to retreat, or if they were frightened by the Chinese soldiers who turned a blind eye to death. The Japanese army began to withdraw in an orderly manner, alternating back and forth to cover and evacuate from the battlefield. Victory! Someone shouted out in the suddenly silent battlefield, and the living soldiers waved their rifles and jumped happily to celebrate this hard-earned victory. Zhou Weiguo lost his dagger and looked around at the battlefield after the end of the White Blade battle. He did not show any joy, on the contrary, he felt waves of discomfort. The bodies of the Japanese soldiers in khaki uniforms and the 88th Division soldiers in khaki gray were intricately laid on the ground, and the losses of their own soldiers were more than twice that of the other side. This is the 88th Division, currently the most well-equipped and well-trained unit in the country. It was personally trained by a German consultant, but just now, in the fierce battle against the Japanese army, the advantage of the troops was completely overwhelming, and it still reached a ratio of 2.1. This victory was not easy and came too tragically. The enemy's battalion, our own regiment, and even the assistance of the 19th Route Army's allies were the ones who defeated the enemy. If today we were alone with a regiment, how many soldiers would survive? The burning pain in his arm made Zhou Weiguo frown and turn his head to take a look. A gap of about 10 centimeters appeared on his arm, with flesh and blood oozing out and flowing down his arm. He threw the knife and tightly suppressed the wound with his hand. I found a nearby place where I could easily get off my feet and sat down. "Brother, you're injured." Just as she sat down and couldn't catch her breath, Zhang Yu almost rushed over to her with a worried expression on her face. When she saw Zhou Weiguo naked, he took off his captain's coat and draped it over Zhou Weiguo's body, turning his head to the medical staff not far away who was rescuing the injured soldiers. "Health worker, stretcher, come this way." However, despite being bitten by the Japanese army and causing minor injuries, Zhang Yu let the stretcher come over. On this battlefield, there are many who need stretchers more than themselves. Zhou Weiguo can only believe that Zhang Yu's current intentions are malicious. Just as he was about to refuse, Wu Yong, holding a rifle, shouted not far away, "Zhang Yu, I knew what kind of shit you were going to do before you even took off your pants. You want to come and dig people out of here. Get out of here and don't be so idle." He came over and squeezed the emaciated Zhang Yu aside with his broad body, casually throwing away Zhang Yu's clothes before intentionally or unintentionally pointing his rifle bayonet at her. "This knife is so sharp, it just stabbed and killed 4 little devils." The quarrel between the two made Zhou Weiguo smile bitterly in his heart. He was a gunner who was over 300 meters away, and Wu Yong wanted to stay. 2 cannons destroyed 3 tanks, and Zhang Yu wanted to dig. Who wouldn't want his subordinates to be powerful? Zhou Weiguo did not want to participate in the struggle between the two of him. Looking around at the bloody battlefield and the wound on his arm again, Zhou Weiguo bit his lip and looked towards the distant Japanese position. After a moment of silence, he decided something. In the future, when colliding with the Japanese army, no matter when, unless absolutely necessary, we must not engage in bayonet combat with the Japanese army. Even with such good skills, the Japanese army would have cut a hole, so the others would have lost their lives. The troops began cleaning the battlefield, picking up Japanese supplies, and the brother troops from the rear came up to take over the position 20 minutes later. Zhou Weiguo also went with the brigade to the second line to rest and prepare for the next battle. The battle order was not received, but it was an order to evacuate and rest later. A regiment lost 2/3 of its troops in this battle, which can be considered as having no combat power. An order was sent from Shangfeng, and the troops rested in the outskirts of Shanghai, waiting for the supply of rear troops. Zhou Weiguo followed the troops westward for more than 30 kilometers with the remaining troops after a simple bandage by the regimental health officer, and entered the town that originally had 700 or 800 households. The town is cold and deserted, with very few people seen. The Shanghai conflict broke out, and the two sides fought fiercely day by day. Many people locked their doors to avoid the war, and schools were closed. A group of people, who were already few, rushed directly to the school to rest and shelter wounded soldiers from the field hospital. The arrival of the troops actually restored some vitality to the town, at least with their own troops present. Those elderly people who were reluctant to leave their homes also began to come out and walk, making the town look less monotonous. One day later, Zhou Weiguo officially received a letter of appointment from the division headquarters, appointing him as a company commander. The rank of lieutenant was originally supposed to be captain, but considering that Zhou Weiguo had just enlisted for a short time, his rapid promotion could easily confuse him and make him lose his original intention, so he was given a lieutenant. Regarding military ranks, Zhou Weiguo didn't care much. As long as he could kill the little devils, it would be enough. Of course, from this perspective, Zhou Weiguo estimated that the appointment letter should be regarded as a reward for his own battlefield efforts. Early this morning, Zhou Weiguo habitually touched the cigarette in his pocket after putting on his military uniform. However, he found that he had run out of cigarettes last night. Thinking that there was a closed tobacco hotel when he entered the town the day before yesterday, he estimated that the door would also open for the next 2 days. He opened the drawer next to it, took 2 coins from it, closed the barracks, and walked to buy cigarettes before he could reach the small shop. The size and excited discussions coming from the alley made him stop curiously and think to himself, what kind of thing could mix 2 emotions? Did you hear that the housing prices in Shanghai are so low now? Rich people are selling at low prices regardless of everything. The old man's voice was weathered and hoarse. Hey, what's the use of that? My son has money, and I dare not buy it. I don't know when this war will end. What if the Japanese army explodes after buying it? A woman continued. That's also right, my son said. Even if it's cheap and becomes the price of tofu, no one will buy it. After all, no one knows how long it will last. The words revealed a sense of disappointment and confusion. Zhou Weiguo was not listening, not even going to the smoking hotel. He was thinking about something. From the conversation between the 2 elderly people just now, it can be seen that the current housing prices in Shanghai are very low, so low that they can even be bought in this town. The key is that it cannot be sold yet. The people don't know how long Shanghai can fight, and even the commanders and divisions don't know, but they know that after waiting for about 10 days, both sides will stop attacking and enter negotiations, and then Shanghai will once again enjoy several years of golden prosperity and development. Shanghai will be worth every inch of land. If I could take advantage of this opportunity to buy some houses from him in Shanghai, maybe I would make a big profit in the future and become a wealthy man all of a sudden. You should know that my father Zhou Jixian didn't dare to buy a house in Shanghai. This house must be bought, but Zhou Weiguo made up his mind and returned to the barracks, opening his drawer but looking disappointed. I was shy in my pocket. When I left home that day, I only took a few silver dollars with me. I had already spent them all. Now, this drawer is so empty that even mice can't fit in. Without money, Zhou Weiguo bought a house with something for himself. Feeling dejected and looking at the empty drawers, he couldn't help but regret not bringing a little more that day. Closing the drawer, Zhou Weiguo lowered his head and pondered. He doesn't want to waste such a good opportunity to hoard houses in vain. But this money. Where can I get it from? Where can I borrow it from Wu Yong and Zhang Yu? How much money can they have? It's not enough to buy a set for themselves. From the team leader, they won't be fooling you either. Whenever he thought about something, he wanted to smoke, but the empty cigarette box made him have to look around. In the end, he picked up a cigarette he had lost last night from the ground and lit it with a match. He quickly took a puff, closed his eyes, sighed slightly, and tapped the desk with his left hand to ponder. This money needs to be obtained from somewhere. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Many noble people forget things. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Many noble people forget things. A rhythmic clatter echoed in the room. Finally, the knocking sound that lasted for nearly 5 minutes came to an abrupt end. Zhou Weiguo opened his eyes and smiled, looking towards Shanghai. He narrowed his eyes and smiled, saying word by word, I actually forgot, I don't have money, but as the president of a business association, you must have money. Zhou Weiguo had just thought of going back to Suzhou to get it, but he didn't have time to do so. He probably won't be able to come back until he gets back. He's afraid that this will end long ago, and he only has about 10 days. From making money to buying a house, he must get it within 7 or 8 days. It was too late to go back, but just now, he thought of someone. Fujino, president of the Japanese Chamber of Commerce. It is this person who runs to the police station every day and sends Zhou Wen to the execution ground. Zhou Wen only killed a low-level samurai ronin wearing a kimono with a broken sword on his waist. This kind of person was not favored by Fujino in the past. With his identity, no one would be sad if anyone was killed after teasing him, let alone teasing Chen Yi, whom Zhou Wen liked at the time. Although Zhou Wen was impulsive, this kind of person should have been killed. Regarding this matter, Zhou Weiguo believed that Zhou Wen did the right thing. However, at that time, there was a conflict between the two sides, and Fujino was just using this as an excuse to expand the situation and allow the Japanese army to gain more benefits, so he had to say that Zhou Wen had killed people from the Chamber of Commerce. And the police station and the higher-ups did not want the situation to escalate. With the pressure of Fujino, Zhou Wenkai was shot and lost his life. He remembered that after Zhou Wen escaped from marriage, he went to apply for military academy. It seemed like he didn't seek revenge, so he didn't consider it himself. He didn't seek revenge, he came to seek it himself. Do you still let the murderer go unpunished? Did you get this shot in vain? That's it. Zhou Weiguo made up his mind and tidied up his military uniform. He walked out of the room and went to the camp to find Wu Yong. He used the excuse of going to Shanghai to visit his family and hoped that Wu Yong would give him a few days off. A group suffered heavy losses and will not be on the battlefield for the time being. Zhou Weiguo saved Wu Yong's life again, and Wu Yong generously approved the holiday. Let Zhou Weiguo go to Shanghai with peace of mind to meet his family. Thanks and gratitude, Zhou Weiguo returned to a platoon and handed over a platoon of only 30 people to a platoon leader. He then changed into a black suit borrowed from Wu Yong that didn't fit well and left the door. Walking in the morning light, it was already an afternoon shrouded in smoke when we arrived in Shanghai. The sound of gunfire in the suburbs was still ringing from time to time, and Zhou Weiguo estimated that friendly troops had once again clashed with the Japanese army over a place. He was not sure if the housing prices in Shanghai were outrageously low, so he specifically went to the exchange to check. It was indeed as the two old men said, cheap as tofu, and no one had bought it yet. This made Zhou Weiguo overjoyed. As he walked with the wind, he headed towards the Rue Concession. After all, Fujino lived in the concession. However, as soon as he arrived at the concession, he was in a difficult situation. In order to ensure the safety of the lease, the Japanese army mobilized troops to block the entrance and exit. Looking at the machine guns on the sandbags and the Japanese soldiers waiting to check their documents, Zhou Weiguo frowned slightly and retreated into an alley with his back against the wall, lighting a cigarette and pondering how to get in. Upon careful observation, he found that the Japanese army only inspected people wearing civilian clothes, and did not inspect warriors wearing kimonos. A smile appeared at the corner of his mouth, and Zhou Weiguo found a way to enter. The emperor does not disappoint those who have a heart. As he walked through the alley, he unexpectedly discovered a drunken warrior wearing a kimono. After losing the cigarette that was almost finished smoking in his hand, Zhou Weiguo knocked it unconscious with just one punch and carried it on his back towards the concession. Approaching the place where the soldiers were guarding, Zhou Weiguo counted the samurai who had long been knocked unconscious by him in Kyoto. Fujita Jun, if you don't listen to me, drink less. Alright now, if you're drunk like this, you're just a woman. There's no need to have trouble with yourself, no matter how big it is. He walked up to the Japanese soldiers who were inspecting and muttered again, look at your virtue, how can I get our documents for the Empire warriors? Walk and walk. The soldier waved his arm, playing the Kyoto tune of Zhou Weiguo. With the addition of this drunkard before him, they would never doubt anything. Everyone knows that no matter what era you are in, don't provoke anyone with a drunkard. If you get caught up in the surging blood and take advantage of the alcohol, you will lose your dog's life. Pop carrying the person to a secluded place, Zhou Weiguo knocked the unlucky ghost to death and pulled his clothes onto himself. He swaggered along the rented street to inquire about Fujino's residence. It took almost half an hour to inquire and find Fujino's residence. Outside the independent two-story small Western-style building, there was a wall that was about 2 meters high. Zhou Weiguo, who had been wandering around and trampling around, did not find any guards before finding an inn to stay and waiting for midnight to move on. On a dark and stormy night, the streets calmed down, with only patrolling concession police shuttling through the streets. They ignored Zhou Weiguo, who was still wandering in the middle of the night, and only showed disdainful eyes before leaving. Zhou Weiguo understood that he looked down upon the samurai who wandered in the middle of the night, but they could only avoid him and avoid him. As the group of people moved away, Zhou Weiguo took a shortcut into the nearby alley, climbed over the wall, and opened the main door with wire. He then went directly to the second floor and knocked out the maid in another room, finding Fujino's bedroom. The sound of thunder made Zhou Weiguo disdainfully enter the door and light it up. Baga, don't you know that I don't like to let in the middle of the night? Suddenly, the glaring light made the short and chubby Fujino curse as he lifted the bedding from the bed and sat up to look at the door. As he looked at a samurai-like figure standing less than 2 meters away from him, his eyes suddenly narrowed and he asked in confusion, "Who are you? How did you appear in my room?" Zhou Weiguo dragged a chair and sat across from Fujino, showing sarcasm, "Don't you remember me, Your Excellency Fujino? I've been thinking about you day and night, hoping for you. Why, it wasn't long before you forgot about me." Fujino couldn't remember who this person was, so he lowered his head and pondered, looking up at Zhou Weiguo, "Do we know each other?" Zhou Weiguo sneered and extended his finger to Fujino, "Not long ago, you had to run to the police station every other day and take my life. It hasn't been much time since then, have you forgotten? I'm just so easy for you to forget." His thinking of something, Fujino cursed and quickly reached out his hand to take out a box of 8 suns from under the pillow. "It's you, you're not dead. Those bastards, Li Daitao, are all bad things." He cursed at the group of people at the police station and looked at Zhou Weiguo with a proud smile, "It doesn't matter anymore. Since you're not dead, let's die again. But I think you're here to seek revenge, right? Come on, I'm giving you this opportunity, but I don't know if it's your speed or my gun's speed." Fujino swayed his gun with pride. Zhou Weiguo did not show any timidity, just squinted his eyes and looked at Tingya, who was so proud and ugly that he remained silent in the sky. Fujino smiled and let out a cold snort after revealing his big yellow teeth. "I really don't know why young people are so impulsive. You're the only one who wants to kill me." Why do you think you can kill me? End of this chapter. Chapter 9. You think I'll let you go? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. You think I'll let you go? Why? Zhou Weiguo glanced sideways at the somewhat proud Fujino. Based on my current lack of money to buy a house, relying on my health, I cannot get a bullet from you for nothing, and relying on my dissatisfaction with you, these reasons are all sufficient. Zhou Weiguo leaned back towards the chair disdainfully and raised his hand, pointing to Fujino's pistol with great indifference. Do you just believe that this gun has bullets? Fujino's eyes showed a hint of confusion, but he still pointed at Zhou Weiguo. What do you mean? Scare me, I'm not scared too much. Scared? Zhou Weiguo smiled and crossed his legs, swaying twice. He tilted his neck and stared at Fujino. Since I can quietly appear here, can't you take advantage of your deep sleep to clean up any potential dangers for me? This reason convinced Fujino to lower his head and look at his pistol. The magazine was still there, but he felt uncertain about taking it out. He believed that the person in front of him dared not do anything and needed enough time to put it on. However, he looked down upon Zhou Weiguo. As soon as the magazine was removed, Zhou Weiguo took a swift step and clenched his fist, directly hitting Fujino's nose. With a click, the bridge of his nose was clearly broken. Zhou Weiguo grabbed the pistol with a backhand and skillfully put it into the magazine, pulling the bolt and showing a mocking expression on his face. A person who uses a gun doesn't even trust their own gun, what else can you trust? In an instant, Fujino, who had become passive, no longer had the arrogance he had just shown. He stared at Zhou Weiguo and cursed cunningly before shrugging his shoulders and saying seriously, so what? You dare not kill me. I dare not, yes. The chairman of the Chamber of Commerce has died, and the Japanese army may use this to escalate the situation. From a common sense, this is not a problem. However, this conflict that neither side was prepared for was just a flash in the pan, and there was no way to start a fight. Just Fujino, the small president of the Chamber of Commerce, really wouldn't let the Japanese high-ranking officials go to war to avenge him. Moreover, this is still the Japanese concession, and Fujino died here. What does it have to do with the outside world? After Zhou Weiguo finished speaking word by word, he licked his lips and stared at Fujino, whose face was slightly turning white. Do you still think that I can't kill you? Fujino was desperate. He firmly believed that the military would not go to war for himself, and once again looked at Zhou Weiguo with pleading and pitiful eyes. Don't kill me, I have money. What I have is money. As long as you don't kill me, it's all yours. Zhou Weiguo, who originally came for money, considered it for a moment. Take it out, let me see your sincerity. Just now, Zhou Weiguo looked around and found that Fujino's private vault is located in this room. When Fujino went over and opened the safe, Zhou Weiguo went over and used a gun to hold his head, opened the safe, and glanced to confirm that there were no weapons inside. He then moved the gun to signal Fujino to take out everything. The dazzling 30 or so large yellow croakers and some silver coins that satisfied Zhou Weiguo all went into his pocket and looked towards Fujino. All right, since you bought your life with money, I'll let you go this time. He threw his gun on the table and turned to leave, but before he could take 2 steps, Fujino behind him once again laughed arrogantly. Zhou Wen, you're still too young. Do you think I'll really let you take it away? Even if you take it away, you shouldn't leave the gun and put down the money for me. Slowly turning around, Zhou Weiguo looked at Fujino with a regretful expression on his face. In the end, with a slight sigh, he threw a yellow-orange bullet from his sleeve onto the desk. Do you have this? Having been deceived once, I would never have been deceived again. Fujino sneered and pulled the trigger, but the gun didn't go off. How could it be? I clearly didn't notice you. Fujino couldn't figure it out, and Zhou Weiguo wouldn't give him another chance, but before Fujino could react, he rushed over and locked his neck with a fierce expression on his face. If I show you all these tricks, I dare to come and seek revenge on you. With a click, Zhou Weiguo forcefully broke his neck. Watching Fujino collapse limply, he let out a cold snort. Do you think I will really let you go? He's so naive. If I let you go, will he still let you seek revenge on my family? Abandoning these words, Zhou Weiguo lit the bed and returned to the inn according to the original route. The next morning, he accompanied the overseas Chinese who went out to help transport supplies out of the concession and went directly to the exchange to buy a house. Even with the hard currency big yellow croaker in hand and some means he used to benefit the exchange, when these things were truly handled and entrusted to him, it was already 3 days later. 15 suites, 3 villas, plus 100 acres of land outside the city, and 7 shops in the SH city area. Zhou Weiguo carefully packed these house deed documents in a small box, proudly stroking the painted red box and secretly thinking that I also had a house in Shanghai. He then brought the box to Citibank and entrusted someone to rent and keep it for him. The money he rented out will be withdrawn and given to Citibank. After the matter was properly handled, Zhou Weiguo ate some wonton at the roadside stall, and then went into the clothing shop to buy a suit for Wu Yong. He had already lost the borrowed suit. After handling the matter properly, he left Shanghai in a daze, humming a tune, carrying a bag of suits, and braved the chilly wind towards the military base. I walked at noon and only saw the town where the station troops were located in the distance at dusk. Holding a cigarette in his mouth, he quickened his pace, but before entering the town, Zhou Weiguo saw Wu Yong's guard Taizi. No one knows what Tizi's real name is anymore. He used to be a blacksmith, and several company leaders also called him Tizi. I haven't waited for Zhou Weiguo to ask Taizi where he's going in a panic. Taizi had already come over and grabbed Zhou Weiguo, dragging him towards the town while muttering, "Oh my platoon leader. I finally found you. If you don't come back, the platoon leader will kill me. Hurry up and leave. The platoon leader has been asking me to find you for 2 days now. You've been back. If you don't come back, I'll go to Shanghai to find you. Find me." When Wu Yong asked for leave, he didn't set a few days for himself. Did he stay in Shanghai for too long, which made him dissatisfied? Zhou Weiguo had Taizi tug at him, and he could only use his other hand to pull out a pack of cigarettes and sway them in front of Taizi twice. "What's wrong? You can tell me so that I can prepare myself," he said. Taizi, who had a dark complexion, was definitely an old smoker who had been smoking for several years. When he saw the smoke, Taizi didn't drag it forward. Instead, he opened the cigarette and generously threw it to Zhou Weiguo. He lit up an immortal aura and took a puff with a somewhat excited but disapproving look in his eyes. "Someone from the military headquarters has arrived." "What?" Zhou Weiguo trembled for a moment and almost didn't let the match burn his hand. He stuttered and stared at Taizi incredulously, asking, "What are you saying?" "Someone from the military headquarters has arrived." Taizi's expression showed surprise and he let out a sound. "Yeah, you came the second day you left and said you wanted to go to the military headquarters. The battalion commander said you went to visit relatives but didn't come back. You don't know, I've been in the military for a few years, and it's the first time I've seen the military headquarters go straight down. TSK. That's it." Ignoring what Taizi was listening to behind him, Zhou Weiguo's heart thumped as he looked up at the somewhat gloomy sky and thought to himself, "We have suffered a great loss now. Every day, I ask for recommendation, collection, and monthly pass. I hope you old railway teachers can support you more." End of this chapter. Chapter 10. General Zhang's Summoning. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. General Zhang's Summoning. There are rumors in the military that General Zhang has always been strict in governing the army. Although the regiment is on rest, the front line is still fighting. Although he took leave with Wu Yong during this period, it was still inappropriate. To some extent, he still violated certain military laws. Regarding military law and the like, Zhou Weiguo probably just hit his own army stick, and his rough skin and thick flesh were not unbearable. However, the problem is that the troops from the military probably came to see him because of his performance in the previous battle. Perhaps General Zhang suddenly remembered that he needed to see him on a temporary basis, and his departure could be considered a missed opportunity. Well, I have become a big landlord myself, and now I have lost the opportunity to find a support. Zhou Weiguo's face was full of disappointment as he felt that his trip to Shanghai was not worth it. Those were all external possessions, without a support, and with so much money, he could only be exploited by others. Tai Zi was smoking and saw Zhou Weiguo's stunned and aggrieved expression on his face. He raised his hand and stabbed Zhou Weiguo. "Captain, what's wrong? Hurry up and leave. Lieutenant Li from the military headquarters is still waiting." Tai Zi's words ignited a flame of hope for Zhou Weiguo, and Lieutenant Li was still waiting, indicating that the military still wanted to see him. "Are you saying, where is Lieutenant Li still?" Zhou Weiguo tentatively pointed to the direction of the lower camp and asked. Tai Zi let out a sigh. "Yes, I came this morning and said I had to wait for you. It wasn't until then that I ran out." The two of them went to the Sanian camp while chatting and walked to the door. Zhou Weiguo stopped Tai Zi in front of him and asked him to report first and change into a new outfit himself. "Now I am still wearing casual clothes. Using casual clothes to meet Lieutenant Li is inappropriate and would damage the military's appearance." Returning to his own room, Zhou Weiguo put on his lieutenant's uniform in a few moves, quickly tied up his armed belt and wore his gun. He tidied up his military appearance from top to bottom, and then carefully peeked out of the barracks to examine the situation inside. Lieutenant Li and Wu Yong sat on the right chair, with teacups placed in front of them. Lieutenant Li, who had full features of the rank of major, showed a hint of dissatisfaction on his face, while Wu Yong's fierce and evil face showed a pleasing smile, but no matter how he looked, it looked awkward. After poking a hornet's nest, Zhou Weiguo took a deep breath and closed his eyes as he walked in. "Report, platoon leader Zhou Weiguo came to report." Observing all directions, Wu Yong slightly spat out a sigh of relief, and Vice Admiral Li transformed from his previous dissatisfaction into an appreciative gaze as he looked at Zhou Weiguo. Indeed, it was the military headquarters who wanted to find him. Lieutenant Li confirmed Zhou Weiguo's identity and looked back at Wu Yong with a hint of disappointment. He smiled and said, "Captain Wu, I'll take the person with me. As for whether I can still come back, I don't know." Zhou Weiguo's words sounded a bit off. It sounded like he was about to be slaughtered and couldn't come back yet. He didn't dare to ask any more questions, so he could only follow Lieutenant Li and get into a small car surrounded by canvas to serve as the hood and windshield, and remain silent. The people who follow the officer are not deep-fried dough sticks. They should know what to say and what not to say. The best way for them is to keep silent. Zhou Weiguo was somewhat nervous. If General Zhang saw that he was about to be executed, what words would he use to explain this trip to Shanghai? If not, how would he respond? "Don't be nervous, the commander just wants to see you." Lieutenant Li turned around and thought Zhou Weiguo was nervous. With a calm smile on his face, he lowered his head and pondered, lifting his eyes with a look of disbelief. "It's really unbelievable. It hit the Japanese army at over 300 meters and even blew up 3 Japanese tanks with 2 shells. Although this is true, I can't believe how you managed it. Can you tell me, this curious person?" Vice Admiral Li looked expectant in his eyes, and Zhou Weiguo didn't want to disappoint him, so he explained the situation on that day. Within 2 minutes of speaking, the vehicle had already parked in front of a small courtyard, which was covered with fallen branches and surrounded by anti-aircraft machine guns. It goes without saying that Zhou Weiguo was also aware that this was the current headquarters of the 5th Army. The vehicle was parked properly, and Deputy Li no longer had the same ease as before. "He just left a message and walked forward after following me." When people with the lowest rank of captain, from all walks of life, look at themselves with a hint of surprise. However, although they are looking at themselves, their footsteps do not stop, after all, everyone is holding a military green folder in their hands. 3 rooms were walked inside, and the dense clattering of the radio became clear. Zhou Weiguo and Deputy Li entered the room. 5 or 6 generals were discussing something around the map, with several colonels holding command poles as if explaining the situation. One of them stood in the middle with his hands on his back and his waist straight, nodding occasionally. On the right side of this group, which was close to his side, was a large row of electrical communication equipment. The person in the middle is undoubtedly General Zhang, but what should I call him? Does he know me? Deputy Li signaled for Zhou Weiguo to stop and he went to report. Zhou Weiguo stood still, somewhat restrained. As soon as General Zhang heard that the person had arrived, he gestured to the other few to continue the discussion. However, he turned slightly and wanted to see who the person who had shot down 3 Japanese tanks with the 2 cannons that day was. On that day, he was also at the forefront command center, from the attack to the end, always standing at a high position. He saw very clearly that the enemy's tank was shot down by 2 shells. At that time, he ordered to investigate who this person was, and when he found out, he brought him to meet him. General Zhang, who didn't want to use his military rank to suppress others, put aside the seriousness he had just discussed with a few people, but showed a hint of a smile. However, when he turned around and saw Zhou Weiguo, his smile instantly became dementia or even surprised. After a moment of surprise, he seemed to poke his finger out and said to Zhou Weiguo, Zhou 1. Zhou Weiguo originally wanted to directly admit that he was Zhou 1, but after a moment of contemplation, he decided to come to General Zhang first in public and then in private. Report, Commander Zhou Weiguo of the Independent Brigade 1st Regiment, 3rd Battalion, 1st Company of the 88th Division came to report. Upon hearing that the other party did not respond, General Zhang probably admitted his mistake and regained his composure without showing any surprise. Zhou Weiguo saw all of this very clearly. He couldn't even understand General Zhang, but from Zhou Wen's memory, he was a person who was very particular about etiquette. First of all, he wanted to tell him that he was a soldier, and then he went on to be private. Uncle Zhang, it's been so long since we parted ways at the riverbank banquet in Suzhou that night. I didn't expect you to remember me, you really have a good memory. Zhou Weiguo smiled and lost his restraint and rigor, giving General Zhang a thumbs up. End of this chapter.